Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Today, Bob and I will be speaking about the dangers of sleep deprivation and stress burnout. Robert Wright, Jr., Ph.D., certified open focus trainer, is an author, speaker, and stress management wellness coach whose passionate goal is translating the significance and implications of scholarly stress and nitric oxide research into language and practical technique which can improve the healthy well-being of the general public. He helps individuals who are struggling with stress burnout, high levels of anxiety, and severe chronic pain by offering time-tested solutions which help them address these issues by teaching them how to shift their attention to improve their locus of control or learn new skills that dissolve their stress, pain, and anxiety. Dr. Wright's research findings demonstrate that the same physiological mechanisms needed to induce relaxation also help us dissolve pain and grief. His study bolsters the linkage between the physiological mechanisms underlying the relaxation response and any method which causes a relaxation response to occur. Dr. Wright's study, published on ProQuest in October 2012, was the first published study to show a correlation between grief, stress, and nitric oxide flatlining and grief recovery, stress reduction, and nitric oxide spiking. To date, as of October 2014, his study remains the only published study linking the variables of grief, stress, and nitric oxide. Dr. Wright is dedicated to educating individuals on the benefits of stress reduction. His most recent books are entitled Orgasmic Relaxation, Unleash the Power of Your Mind to Relax Using the Tension Relieving Technique, 2nd edition, and 7 Tips for Avoiding Stress Burnout for the Busy Entrepreneur. He also recently published the Spanish language version of his TRT book, and he is the author of numerous popular articles on stress and anxiety reduction, sleep deprivation, and grief recovery. Dr. Wright holds a master's degree in psychology from Union Institute and University. Bob is a certified practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming and Ericksonian hypnosis. He enjoys travel and has set his next fun travel goal to become a member of the Century Travel Club, which offers membership to travel aficionados who have visited at least 100 countries. Bob offers private and group training in methods to lessen your stress, pain, grief, and anxiety so that you can feel better. Bob is also available as a consultant for corporate wellness coaching and for speaking engagements. Bob, welcome.
Hi, Christine, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You're very welcome. Also, welcome to our audience. And Bob, would you tell our audience how you came to have an interest in sleep deprivation and stress burnout studies?
Great, Christine. Like many people through the years, there have been times when I have gone through more than 24 hours without sleep, as many people have, commonly called pulling an all-nighter. And at times in the past, I had to work 7 days per week. And although I recall feeling extremely fatigued when I think back about it during those days, it wasn't until I started to dig down into the literature and what I discovered when I started checking out studies dealing with insomnia and sleep deprivation, the conclusions and the implications of these studies made me become alarmed at just how damaging being sleep deprived or going without sleep can be. For instance, there are studies which have demonstrated that when you just go 24 hours or one night without sleep, if your blood is drawn, that you have the same molecules which would be circulating in your bloodstream as a person who has experienced brain damage. Well, Christine, when I first came across studies like that, it was literally mind-blowing, and it stopped me in my tracks because what it made me think of was how misdirected much of many of the things that go on in schools, in that in high school and in colleges, in some schools in particular, it's almost a badge of honor to say that I stayed up all night studying, I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, and particularly during midterms or final exams, or when you have papers due, students across the board, whether in the graduate school or college, are literally burning the midnight oil or burning the candle at both ends. And what these studies demonstrated was that it was not just a matter of burning the midnight oil. It was like comparable to burning the candle at both ends and burning the middle of the candle when you looked at the outcomes of the statistics. In terms of stress burnout, my interest in stress came about out of necessity. Simply put, stress burnout knocked on my door involuntarily, and I was hospitalized. And that's how I became familiar with it. And in an attempt to figure out a strategy or ways to deal with stress burnout proactively and how to prevent it from reoccurring, I stumbled across the field of psychoneuroimmunology. And for those who are not familiar with that field, if you could think of guided mental imagery, that might be more familiar. In any event, there's a whole literature of psychological research, neuroscience research, neuropsychology research, and cognitive psychology research that has demonstrated time and again that you could use the power of your creative imagination to cause epigenetic type changes in your body. And so that has been demonstrated, and the field of psychoneuroimmunology deals with that. There's a famous book where a Yale Medical School professor had brain cancer, and he was able to deal effectively with the cancer and heal himself using the psychoneuroimmunology. And so there are many studies like that. It's not just a one-off. But in any event, I got interested in psychoneuroimmunology, and then later I went on to do master's level work in neuropsychology. I wanted to understand the neuropsychological components or correlates of peak experience and peak performance. Specifically, I wanted to get a grasp on whether or not there were similarities between what the top highest performing athletes do, like, for example, an Olympic athlete who would win a gold medal, and what people do in business, for example, a top trader in the futures market or a stock trader. And so that's how I got interested in that, and I wanted to understand the underpinnings of the belief system of what makes winners win, or at least allows them to win. And then over time, I just want to say that, of course, like most people, I keep up to date with the literature, and specifically the new findings in nitric oxide research and stress research, and the exciting findings in brain plasticity. The reason I mention those is that what I enjoy doing, Christine, very much, and I want to say to our audience, is that it gives me great pleasure to be able to translate the conclusions or findings and or implications of a scholarly or academic study into language that an average person in the general public would find of interest and would not be some 25-syllable word that when you are able to describe, well, this is the significance of this is how this affects your body, and this is why it's important. And so one of the things that when I've seen the comparison of a scholarly study with the write-up of an abstract and the popular version, it's very striking, and sometimes I have to read the scholarly study abstract twice to see if it's actually still the same study. And so I'm very proud of the fact that part of, I feel like, my mission is to be able to bring to the public's attention helpful information that can reduce stress across the board and put it in terms that it would be hopefully of interest to the average person.
Thank you, Bob. I think it definitely would be of interest. I imagine many in our audience have had those experiences where they've pushed through and stayed up beyond healthy limits. And certainly the information that you bring to the table shows us that that's really not in our best interest. Now, Bob, from the time I met you, I've known you to love writing. Why do you enjoy writing the way you do, and what purpose does it fulfill for you?
Well, first off, Christine, I just want to mention one thing that I left off on your last question, is that part of my enjoyment of the writing is that I feel that I can do something that is unique and not being done. So, for example, I recently published a book called 7 Tips for Avoiding Stress Burnout for Busy Entrepreneurs and Small Business People. And what makes that satisfying for me is that I'm taking the science behind the stress research and putting it in simple terms for entrepreneurs and small business people. And by the way, the tips that I give would be applicable to almost anyone. You don't have to have a business, but that was the focus of that book. And then later this month, I will also publish a separate work on sleep deprivation. Now to the question that you had asked, let me see. First, for me, Christine, writing is simply an extension of my thinking or thought process. So in a way, the answer to your question would be like asking me, so Bob, why do you love to talk? And so as you can imagine, there's no need to answer that one. The second thing is that my writing serves as a form of creativity for me, so therefore it's natural. You know, everybody is creative, and it's actually fun when you use your creativity because it's like a childlike part of you, and it's a what if. And so what I would say is that it's natural, it's simply pleasurable to see my words when I write them because I never know exactly what's going to come out. And then one very interesting thing is that what I've discovered is that once I have an idea fully formed with clarity, the writing process is almost an automatic one. And I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but here would be an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say when I have to write an article, typically for me, the toughest part seems to be coming up with the subject matter that interests me. And then once I can find something that I'm interested in as a topic, the next step is that I move to figure out a working title for the article. Let's say I'm doing an article. And essentially what I've discovered is that once I get that clarity of the working title, basically the article is written at that point. And I don't know if that sounds strange to you or our audience, but my explanation for that is that apparently the clarity of the topic with the working title seems to somehow access the stored knowledge that I have on a particular subject matter. And I think, this speaks to the fact that I'm writing about something that I care about or I have some knowledge of, or that I'm willing to do some research on and find out more. And so I think that might not apply to subject matter that I was nonplussed about. So I think since I've read a wide assortment of material over many years, it's like doing a puzzle. The pieces seem to come together and they just seem to fit. It's like when you're playing Scrabble and you have the letters Z and Q and you're looking to figure out, I need a word with a Q that doesn't have the letter U, or I need a 2-letter word that starts with Z. And so if you've played Scrabble long enough, you learn those little tricks that, the letters that give you the most points, the Q, the X, the Z, and then you want to get on a triple word score. and so writing seems to work a little bit like that. And so the point is, however it works, the bottom line, what I'm saying, is very pleasurable for me, and it's fun. And I imagine for many, many people, it would be similar to doing a collage or something like that.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. Your writing process is very different than mine, and that's why I've always been fascinated by it. You write very easily and fluidly, whether you're writing for an academic purpose or whether you're doing an article for a more popular audience. And now we know that you are a Scrabble fan. Now, Bob, you've done a great deal of research in the area of stress, and you've had your own personal health challenges because of stress burnout. What do you think are some of the core causes of stress burnout that the general population faces?
Well, Christine, before I answer that question, I just want to thank you for bringing up an issue, and I think that there are people in our audience who write or do things, and they don't do it exactly the way it's taught. You're supposed to write and you make an outline, et cetera. So I want to thank you for mentioning that fact, that the way that I go about the writing process or the way I use my creativity is actually very opposite in some aspects to yours. And I think a good thing to highlight is that for people in our audience that have found something that works in their lives, or whether it's writing or not, that they do things a little bit differently. Like, for example, it could be the way that you wash the dishes or mop the floor, or the way you go about your job, or the way you commute. I remember I met a gentleman, I remember complaining about the traffic and the commute, and he said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I commute from Hong Kong to San Francisco twice a week." and so that gave me a different kind of perspective. And then over years I met people that commuted from LA to New York, or I remember meeting a gentleman that every single day he flew from Toronto into LaGuardia. And so that's very different. So the reason that I mention that is that you, as far as I can see, when you write, you're very organized, and that is, you're to be applauded for that. And you use an outline and as scaffolding. And whereas my process is very, very different. And so, as I said, if I'm doing an article, basically I just need to know what I'm writing about, and then I spend a lot of time trying to get that 36 to the left, 26 to the right, 7 combination of the title. And at least for me, and there may be other people in our audience that they have some similar process, when they do that, the thing just gels. And so yeah, I guess I could write an outline, because the outline, once it comes together, is, when I'm 90% done, I have my outline, whereas you start with an outline and say what I want to do. So I just wanted to mention that point.
Well, it is a good point, Bob, because everybody does have a different process. And it really isn't a matter of right or wrong, but I mean, what I admire about you is that you'll write a book on the back of an envelope while you wait in line at the post office. And so that's part of what I admire in your skill and fluidity with the way you write.
Well, Chris, what I discovered years ago was that when it comes to ideas, an idea can come at any time. You can be waking up from a nap, or just from waking up from a dream. Or years ago, what I discovered was I was reading a book, and a guy was saying that he got good ideas in the shower, and he was in advertising, and he couldn't figure out, well, what could he do? And then he was in a meeting, and it was suggested to him, well, why don't you get one of those boards that you can write in the shower? And so his productivity skyrocketed. So it's a little bit funny to say, "Oh, I'm doing notes and drawing storyboard pictures in the shower," but that worked for him. And so the reason I just want to emphasize this in terms of keeping your stress down, there's so many people that are made to feel, because they do things a little bit different, as if something's wrong with them. No, you're okay. It's just that you have a style. And so it's like the guy who, when he was running the first guy to run the 4-minute, break the 4-minute mile barrier, when they videotaped him, people were trying to imitate his style, and what was found out was that the reason he had that special kick was because one of his legs was shorter than the other. So there you had all these people trying to emulate that, and he was using it as a compensatory thing. So now to your question. So let's see. What I want to point out first is that in terms of stress burnout, that phrase was originally coined by a gentleman named Herbert Fredenberger back in 1974. And to put it very simply, The stress burnout is when you don't take care of yourself, and the consequences of not addressing the stressors that you have that have become severe leads to some very bad outcomes. So, for example, the symptoms of stress burnout include having depleted physical energy, emotional exhaustion, a lowered resistance to illness. The person often shows signs of withdrawing from relationships. The person could take on an increasingly pessimistic outlook. There's increasing levels of absenteeism from work, and of course, worsening job performance. Second, there are many causes of stress burnout, but I would just drop the top three stressor categories here, and they are a burnout related, that's job related, lifestyle related, and burnout that's psychological. So the top causes of job burnout pretty much are things like being faced with impossible or unclear job performance requirements, a lack of recognition on the job, poor pay, poor communication, poor management, and on no downtime. And so, people are familiar with not having any downtime. On the lifestyle side, the lifestyle choices that lead to burnout include popular limiting belief, and I think many people in our audience may have heard this before, which would be, I work best under pressure. An individual may be able to do that for a while, but over time, especially over many years, without any downtime, I know many people have probably encountered someone who brags they never take a vacation. And so the literature shows, the consequences of never taking a vacation. On average, it doesn't work out so well. There's increased levels of heart attacks and other type of non-happy events that happen that people don't like to talk about, and they may not immediately connect those to being stressed out or having what's called stress burnout. But I can assure you that over time, if you don't address those things, the lifestyle choices, the person can meet up with multiple chronic stresses which have serious negative health consequences. On the psychological side, there are many causes of stress burnout. So among the top psychological causes would be something like having perfectionist tendencies, a person who has a pessimistic outlook, the infamous type A personality, where the person is constantly impatient with free-floating hostility towards others, or the person has a poor job fit. And so what I would say is this, that briefly, that of course, while, we all seek to achieve excellence and we strive for excellence, and that is a good thing. However, when that turns in trying to make everything that we do be perfect, then we are setting ourselves up for an impossible situation, because since we're human, everything can't be perfect. And so the downside of that is that if you fall into that trap, then you can become very self-critical and critical of others, and that would unnecessarily heighten your stress.
Thank you, Bob. Now, you've actually already given a lot of this information, but what additional advice can you offer our audience when it comes to taking stress burnout seriously? And of the tips mentioned in your book, which are the most valuable to follow?
Okay, Christine, it's just that. What I would say is that stress burnout is something that needs to be acknowledged, especially if you're on the verge of stress burnout. I think that's the key thing I want to emphasize to our audience, that there might be many people that would be on the verge of stress burnout, but might not recognize that that's what it is. They might be tired all the time, or argumentative, or flying into a rage very easily. And so those all are symptoms, potential symptoms of stress burnout. Of course, there can be many other things, but it's important to be alerted to that. The reason I say that is because if you're on the verge of stress burnout, you still have an opportunity to take corrective action as prevention. However, if you wait too long and you actually get burned out, extra crispy style, that means you could be hospitalized or taken out of the game altogether. And that wouldn't matter if you're on your job or at school or in your business, and that could be temporarily or that could be permanently. And so many people aren't aware that, yes, stress can be debilitating. And so, of course, it's best to avoid burnout altogether and be proactive. And you do that by managing your stress and by paying attention to your stress and doing something about it by taking action. And so, briefly, the things that a person can do is, the first thing is the recognition, is to stop denying that your stress levels may be too high and that you either are currently overwhelmed or on the verge of being overwhelmed. So acknowledging your stress burnout is the first step to combating it. And then the next thing would be to get help, to use your support network by speaking to people you trust. For some people, that can be difficult. However, opening up in this way allows you to let off steam, and it keeps you open to helpful suggestions from others. Christine, I can't overemphasize this point. So many people can get into this mode, I have to do everything myself, and that they could have this tendency to think if I ask for help or use the assistance of someone else, that would be a sign of weakness. And ironically, some people who have that belief are people who have helped many other people. And I think, both of us have been surprised to find out a person who has helped others in need, and then when they are in need, so for example, someone has, breaks their leg and they have a full cast, and they obviously need help getting in and out of the tub or whatever. And it's very surprising sometimes when they would say things like, well, I don't want anybody to help me, or that type of thing. And so using your support system is a smart thing to do. The other thing is very, 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 very obvious. Get a checkup, especially these days, that you would be surprised how many people have not had a checkup. And so what you want to do is make sure that there's no systemic imbalance, and that can also give you peace of mind. Another thing that people can do is to look at their nutrition, to ask yourself by doing an inventory, what is my food intake like? Is it healthy? Are you consuming foods high in salt and sugar, and those foods cause your blood pressure to skyrocket or your energy levels to crash? It's a simple thing, but it's something that you need to do, because certain foods would aggravate stress or anxiety or other conditions you might have, or you might be allergic to something that you're eating. Take an honest look at your schedule. Are you overscheduled? Are you allowing enough time for the unexpected interruptions? So that really needs no explanation. However, as we see, many people we know, they are overscheduled, and so by taking a pause and to take an honest look at your schedule, that can be a huge burden lifted off you in terms of being more realistic about what's doable. One of the last two things would be something, again, very obvious, which is getting adequate sleep. Recent studies demonstrate that not getting enough sleep increases your chances for accidents, mistakes, and diminished job performance. And then the last thing is downtime. Allow yourself the pleasure of relaxing or just doing nothing. This, along with moderate exercise, will help boost your mood and reduce your stress.
Thank you, Bob. Those are all excellent tips that it would be helpful for anyone in our audience to follow. You often talk about how detrimental not getting enough sleep can be, and how lack of sleep can adversely affect job performance and increase the possibility that you will make mistakes or have a foreseeable or preventable accident. Can you share with our audience why you say that sleep needs to be elevated in importance in our daily routines?
Yes, Christine, thank you so much. For our audience, here are some startling statistics about sleep deprivation. According to the Centers for Disease Control, insufficient sleep is now at crisis levels and considered to be a public health epidemic. According to recent federal statistics, more than 1,500 individuals are killed in car crashes each year due to sleepy or drowsy drivers, and that driver fatigue due to lack of sleep causes over 100,000 preventable car crashes each year. A new study from Uppsala University, Sweden, published in the journal Sleep, showed that just one night of sleep deprivation resulted in a loss of brain tissue and circulation of brain molecules typically found in your blood under conditions of brain damage. A study done at the University of Surrey in London, UK, concluded that the lack of sleep directly causes over 700 genes in your body to change. Researchers at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston showed that getting a good night's sleep protects your heart. Studying over 70,000 women between the ages of 40 and 65 years old, the study found that women who slept an average of 5 hours or less per night were 45% more likely to have heart problems compared with women who slept a full 8 hours. Researchers at the University of Helsinki have now shown that sleep loss negatively affects the immune system, triggering inflammation in your body. This large 2013 population study, published in the journal PLOS ONE, concluded that insufficient sleep increases your risk of cardiovascular diseases and type 2 diabetes. All of these studies indicate that sleep has a critical role to play in maintaining healthy well-being. We ignore our sleep at our own peril. The statistics speak for themselves.
Thank you, Bob. I mean, these are really eye-opening statistics. They're startling and in some cases very sad. Basically, the statistics show that sleep deprivation is not only a detriment to your health and your physiological well-being, it can also be a danger, certainly falling asleep on the road. You're actually risking hurting someone else by your sleep deprivation. Bob, I want to thank you so much for sharing this wonderful information with us. I just enjoy interviewing you as always, and I want to thank our audience for listening. Now, Bob, what would you like to share about what you do and how our audience can connect with you?
Okay, thanks for asking that question, Christine. First, I want to point out that the mission of StressFreeNow.info is to be one of the premier stress relief sites on the Internet. Our goal is to assist clients and customers with their stress, anxiety, grief, and chronic pain issues by providing products and services which helps them gain control over their stressors. I help people who are struggling with stress burnout, high levels of anxiety, severe chronic pain, and who are grieving by offering time-tested solutions which help them address these issues by teaching them how to shift their attention to improve their locus of control, or I teach them new skills so that they can learn to dissolve their stress, to dissolve their pain, and dissolve their anxiety. What makes my approach unique is that I customize my approach based upon the unique variables any potential client presents, depending on their education level, their past experience, and the most important or pressing issue. For instance, if a person is experiencing high levels of anxiety or is regularly experiencing panic attacks, I work with the client to give them tools to stop the panic attacks in real time as they are forming. And then I would work with the client to identify the underlying issues so that those can be addressed. This wellness coaching process is different than therapy in that a client makes fast and measurable progress towards her objective. No time is spent in rehashing negativity, and clients report feeling shifts in their emotional well-being right away. Some of the techniques that I use includes the open focus or Ericksonian hypnosis and the various NLP techniques like the 6-step refrain or submodalities execution. And Chris, what I have to say is that I personalize and I customize by using an active listening approach to get a good sense of how best to work with a client in a coaching environment. My email address to contact me is dr.bob@stressfreenow.info. Again, that's dr.bob at stressfreenow.info, and my office number is 954-900-2179. Again, my office phone number is 954-900-2179 for anyone who would wish to contact me.
Thank you so much, Bob. And I would just like to specify that the email uses the abbreviation of doctor. So that's the abbreviation dr.bob at stressfreenow.info. So that's dr.bob at stressfreenow.info. And the office phone number is 954-900-2179. Bob, thank you so much for a great interview. What final thoughts or key idea would you like to share with our audience as a takeaway from today's broadcast?
Great, Christine. Thanks. I have enjoyed this, and I know you've been after me for quite some time to get this done, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to lay everything out so that we could sit down. What I would say is that, namely, the key thought is that to our audience is that managing and dealing with your stress and preventing stress burnout is an ongoing process. Getting enough sleep regularly will not only make you feel better and lower your habitual stress levels, most likely you'll also witness increases in performance and productivity, and importantly, the research literature shows that the additional alertness lessens your chances of having accidents and or making mistakes due to extreme fatigue. And I think anyone would say that's a good thing. Anything that can reduce the amount of mistakes that we make and the chances for accidents, that's a good thing. And especially when you consider someone falling asleep while driving, which could result in tragic consequences. So to wrap up, what I'll say is that to stay on top of your game, it's best to have a systematic way for dealing with your stress. And one way to do that is to work with a wellness coach like myself. Whatever you choose to do, if you choose not to address your stress issues, or you choose not to get enough sleep, eventually that fact will catch up with you, unfortunately, either in the form of chronic disease states or perhaps via an unfortunate accident or a critical mistake which occurs during the stress burnout process. And I say unfortunate because in many cases, in hindsight, we realize that if we were not exhausted or not burned out or not fatigued to an excess, we could have often prevented something, a mistake or an accident, because we were tired. And that's why I said it's unfortunate. So thank you, Christine.
Thank you so much, Bob, for this interview. I know that our audience appreciates your sharing, and thank you, audience, for listening. For Dr. Robert Wright, Jr., this is Christine Wright of www.stressfreenow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.